Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting, special meeting for Thursday, November 14th, 2019. I call the meeting to order and ask Vice Chair Harlan to lead us in the pledge. Thank you, Vice Chair. Julie, roll call, please.
Chair Dirickle.
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan.
Here.
Commissioner Colbert.
Present.
Commissioner Russell. Commissioner Torje absent. Commissioner Zick.
Here. Thank you, Julie. We have no announcements and presentations on the agenda this evening, which brings us to public comment. To ensure fair and equal treatment of all who appear before the Planning Commission and to expedite city business, speakers may be limited to 3 minutes during public comments to speak on any item within the Planning Commission's jurisdiction which is not listed on tonight's agenda. This time may be exceeded for good cause by the chair or by a majority vote of the Planning Commission. Is there anyone wishing to speak to public comment tonight? Again, this is items that are in our jurisdiction, not on the agenda tonight. Okay? We'll close public comment. That will take us to Planning Commissioner comments and suggestions, and we'll begin with Commissioner Russell.
Nothing tonight.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Zick?
Nothing.
All right, Commissioner Colbert.
Just a delayed Veterans Day announcement, just a thanks to those whom serve.
Thank you, sir. Vice Chair Harlan.
Nothing.
Okay, just a couple of things for me. I want to first thank Councilmember Andrea Marr for her nomination to kind of extend my term on the Planning Commission and for the City Council's support of that nomination. And I look forward to continuing to work with staff and all my fellow commissioners on very important planning issues coming up in the next couple of years. So I'm grateful for that. Also, we will have a November 25th meeting, and then we'll have our Thanksgiving holiday, and I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Also want to echo Commissioner Colbert's Veterans Day remarks. There were 4 veterans in my family and an active duty nephew, so I appreciate the service that they provide and provided our country. And then I also want to just acknowledge today the terrible shooting at Saugus High School in Santa Clarita. And we will be adjourning tonight's meeting just with good thoughts and prayers for the families affected at that awful event. So with that, we have nothing on the consent calendar tonight, and that will take us to public hearing item number 1. Julie.
Public hearing item number 1, planning application 19-22 and tentative parcel map 2019-139 for a 2-unit residential common interest development at 2070 Thurin Street. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Commissioners, any communications to report? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Glupos, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Willie Glupos, an Assistant Planner for the city. Tonight, we have a proposal for a 2-unit condo development that would be attached to one another on an 8,000 square foot property. The design would be contemporary architecture. The property is located on the west side of Costa Mesa on Thurin Street between Victoria and Bay Street. It is surrounded by a similar 2-story development except for the property across the street, which is a single-story memory care facility. The following slides show the existing condition of the neighborhood. The top image is the front view of the existing single-story 2-unit apartment complex with a detached 2-car garage. The image to your lower left is the 2-story, 32-unit residential common interest development. Across the street, as mentioned earlier, is a single-story memory care facility. Diagonal to that, which is shown on the image upper right-hand corner, is a 2-story, 10-unit residential common interest development. And to the north, abutting the property, is a parking lot for the 2-story, 10-unit apartment complex. The proposal meets the development standards such as the front, side, and rear setback, as well as the parking requirement 2 indoor and 2 outdoor. The proposal exceeds the required 40% open space. The applicant has proposed 45%. It also does not exceed the 25% rear yard coverage. The proposal is 15%. In terms of landscaping, it meets all the landscaping standards. More specifically, the number of 15-gallon trees. It is required to have 8 trees. They are proposing exactly 8 trees. So this slide shows the location of windows. As shown, the windows are offset from each other. The second story door at the rear, shown in blue there, mitigates the view impacts by providing the 15-gallon trees. The development also meets the design guidelines in terms of the first to second floor ratio not to exceed 100%. The development is 84%. It also provides second story setback to reduce the perceived mass from the public right-of-way. It also includes multiple vertical and horizontal elevation offsets. As mentioned earlier, the style will be contemporary architecture with brick, veneer, and stucco. The color will be white and gray tones, which complements that contemporary style. The floor plan are open in concept, again complementing the contemporary architecture with the living spaces on the first floor and the private spaces on the second floor. It is proposing a total of 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. The parcel map will be a 1-lot airspace with common use shown in purple. Private use is shown in blue. To conclude, the proposal meets development standards, the design guidelines, and the general plan. It is compatible with the surrounding 2-story condo developments that is existing on site. The project staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to find that the project is exempt from CEQA 15303 and approve planning application 1922 and the tentative parcel map 2019-139 subject to conditions of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aglupos. Commissioners, any questions of staff? Commissioner Colbert.
I have 2 questions. One is related to the infrastructure of the property. I noticed in the staff report on page 5 that it is noted that there won't be extensive infrastructural improvements. What improvements are taking place on the site, if any?
Our statement in the staff report primarily refers to off-site infrastructure. That's the aim of that particular policy, is to evaluate whether development of the project would require infrastructure improvements beyond on-site. We'll take a look at the plans and get back to the commission quickly as to any on-site improvements.
Okay, Commissioner Zick, did you have a question?
I did, thank
Yes,
you. So on page 2, I was looking at the table of comparative values. I just want to make sure I understood better the lot width being less than the minimum, the lot area being less than the requirement, and the comment is that it doesn't apply to a common interest development. So can you explain to me would this have to, for the 100-foot minimum and the 12,000 square foot minimum to be applicable, would that be if the lot was being split? And because that lot is too small, it's a common interest development as opposed to a lot split?
That's correct. This would be applicable if it was a subdivision that was creating a new parcel that was either smaller than in area or width than the existing parcel.
Okay, and then I was curious about the handling of the requirement in the CCNRs regarding the parking and the garage. I wasn't able to find, and it may be in here, whether there's an annual certification that the association must make that the garages are in fact being used to park the vehicles? Is that one of the conditions? And if not, is it typical that it would be?
So our CCNRs typically speak to the end result. So our requirement in the condition of approval would be that the association ensure that the garages aren't used for anything but parking. I don't believe that there's an annual sort of verification process that we require. That isn't typical, but it's something that we can require as part of the condition of approval.
Is that a condition that you've seen applied to other developments over the last several years in our city?
Not in Costa Mesa. I think it is typical in planning in general.
Okay. And then I was kind of curious about this idea. In a larger development, common interest development, I can see where, people might hold each other accountable. That's kind of the idea. In a project as small as this, does that seem to be a concern that the two homeowners may just sort of wink and a nod and live the way they want to live, independent of what the CCNRs require?
For a development of this size, it's not usually a concern. It's typically something that we focus more on if it's a larger development. For
Okay.
2 units, it would not be typical.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioners, any other questions of staff? Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. I will open the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward, please. Is the applicant here? Good evening, sir. If I could have you state your name and address for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Yes, good evening. My name is Walt Bushman. I'm the building designer for the project.
And Mr. Bushman, I would ask if you and the applicant have read the conditions of approval and if you agree with them.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The floor is yours. If you have a presentation you would like to give, or?
No, I think actually John Willie, his presentation was excellent, and I think it describes the project in full. It's a very simple project.
Okay. I will probably have a question or two for you when you come back up. I will then, you can have a seat if you have no presentation to give. And I will open public comment portion of the public hearing and see if anyone wishes to speak to this item. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening,
Good
Barry
evening.
Fisher. This doesn't have to do specifically with this project, but your reference to the CCNRs and the parking in the garages and the inspection, that has been used in the past because the units across Victoria a number of years ago when they were built, I live across Victoria from them, and a lot of the residents parked in our neighborhood, and we brought that up at their planning commission meeting, and they did put in their conditions of use, CCNRs, and the association was required to inspect those garages yearly and submit a report to the city. And since that time, it's been, to my knowledge, I haven't been doing this for a while, it's been rather common to have that in this type of development to stop people from using garages as storage units because parking is at a premium in the city. So not to disagree with staff, but it has been very common in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'll close the public comment portion of the hearing and ask the applicant to come forward. I have one question of staff, and then I'll have a question for you. So if you can just stand by.
Yes.
Staff, I'm looking at conditions of approval, condition of approval number 11 on handwritten page 8. It says the driveway shall be finished with stamped concrete or pervious pavers. So I'll get to that, but my preference would be pervious pavers, not and or, or. The final landscape concept plan shall indicate the landscape palette and the design material of paved areas, and the landscape hardscape plan shall be approved by the planning division. So my question is the landscape plan that was presented to us in the supplemental memo tonight, than required under condition number 11? In other words, they're required to execute this landscape plan under condition number 11.
The landscape plan provided it is typically conceptual, and so it's still required to be submitted at the time of plan check. There may be some minor changes. Staff evaluates those changes and ensures that it's consistent with what the commission approved.
Okay. So I will, thank you, Ms. Lee. I will ask then the applicant, my preference would be that you not do stamped concrete, that you do pervious pavers for
I have no
obvious reasons.
Pervious pavers would be fine. I think they would look really good.
I would, so then if the driveway shall be finished with pervious pavers and we took out stamped concrete, you'd be all right with that?
Most definitely.
Okay, thank you, sir. Then the other question I have, it's unique design. I kind of like it. When
thank
I
you.
first saw the elevations, I was a little put off by the massing of the brick veneer between the two front doors. So I'm going to ask that the landscape plan that was presented, which is nice,
Yeah, the 3D
actually be
rendering.
executed, because that tree
Helps.
there and that landscape area there really kind of cuts that massing down of that brick veneer wall.
Yes.
So if I put in that the landscape, well, I'll leave it to staff and you to make sure that that brick veneer wall is covered up.
Okay. If you take a look at the 3D rendering,
Yes.
it helps to break
It
up the
does.
massing.
It does, okay. And I just wanted to make sure that, I wanted to express my concern that needs to have some real softening from a landscape perspective.
Totally understand.
Okay, perfect. Anybody else, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
two questions. Well, first thing I noticed on the front page, it identifies you as the building designer.
Correct.
Are you a licensed architect?
I am not, no.
Okay. And then the second question, when I look at handwritten page 28, and this is really a question just more for my edification, I don't fully understand the, I'll call it an inverse slope of the roof on each end.
Yeah, so it's called a butterfly roof, and it actually has a cricket, and it swales to both ends of the roof, and then it'll be picked up with a downspout and gutter, or a gutter and downspout.
And the idea behind that design element?
It's a modern look. I mean, I personally like that look. I like the butterfly roofs. City of Newport Beach, the public library, you'll see that style of architecture on that, as well as Huntington Beach. Some of the lifeguard towers, the newer lifeguard towers have those roofs.
Okay. I was curious about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Commissioner Colbert?
Couple of questions.
Sure.
This property is geared toward owner-occupied housing?
I'm sorry, what?
Is it going to be geared toward owner-occupied housing?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And can you just give me, just maybe my own ignorance, what the maturity is of the Australian willows or Chitabala tree for your landscaping plan, like what the maturity is on the rear?
I actually don't have the landscape plan with me. I have just my architectural drawings, so I don't know what that count is. But the landscape plan should state, what the number of each type of tree is.
Okay, I will look for that. And then for the rear, within I believe the initial architectural rendering, it showed lighting. Could you explain, is there any lighting impact? I'm not sure if staff evaluated that for the top elevation. I think there were like some rear lights on the top.
Okay, so
Exterior
the
lights.
building will have low-level lighting around the
Low-level
perimeter, but it will be at the first floor.
Okay.
At the first level. The decks at the rear yard on the second floor will also have lighting, but again, it'll be low-level lighting. And then on either side, or on each side of the garage doors, there'll be low-level lighting as well, and at the front entries. So the building will have, will be lit, but it'll be low-level lighting.
Okay.
And that's all shown on my power and lighting plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant, commissioners? Okay, thank you, sir.
Right, thank you very much.
I will close the public hearing and bring it back up to the dais and ask if there are any motions or, let me get back to my home panel here, or further questions of staff. I see that there's a motion by Vice Chair Harlan, so if you would please state your motion, sir.
Sure. I move that we find the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per CEQA guidelines section 15303 and approve planning application 19-22 and tentative parcel map 2019-139 subject to conditions of approval, including those modifications requested by the chair.
Thank you. And staff, are we clear on the modifications I requested for the conditions of approval, specifically the use of pavers for the driveway and to make sure we adequately landscape the front? And I'm going to leave it up to you guys to figure that out.
We will make those modifications.
Thank you
to the
very
commission.
much. Seconded by Commissioner Zick. Are there any comments before we vote? Commissioner Colbert.
Sorry to belabor this, but there was two questions that I didn't ask and that I
That's
just
fine.
want memorialized for the record. Just interested in to see if this development, since it is a development that is legal non-conforming at this time, if properties adjacent to this development, if they also are demoed and attempt to redevelop in the future, would this create a development trend in the adjacent properties as far as density requirements are concerned? So that was just a question. Not sure if we can answer it in the middle of a motion, but.
Sure, that's fine. Ms. Lee.
So the adjacent properties, I don't think it would cause a development trend. Certainly any adjacent properties that proposed redevelopment of a CID project would have the same requirements as this one. So I don't see it as a trend. I think that because the lot size and lot width are non-conforming in this particular instance, it's a condominium map that isn't further subdividing it. That would be the same for any adjacent properties.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? I will call for the question.
That motion carried 5-0 with Commissioner Torje absent.
Okay, and that decision is final unless appealed to the City Council within 7 days. Thank you very much. Good luck. Okay, Julie, planning hearing, public hearing number 2, please.
Public hearing item number 2, planning application 19-18 for a conditional use permit to operate an indoor axe throwing facility with on-site valet at 2020 Placentia Avenue. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Commissioners, any communications to report? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Glupos, you're up again. It's your big night.
Chair and Commissioners, this next proposal is for an indoor axe throwing facility with 8 lanes and ancillary uses. The existing industrial building contains an auto repair business, a design build firm, and an axe throwing office. The design build firm and axe throwing are in the same suite and are owned by the same person. The proposal would allow for a recreational axe throwing business. The property is located on the west side as well, along Placentia Avenue. It is surrounded by mixed of uses from industrial uses to residential uses. The reason being is that the whole block is within an overlay zone, either a Mesa West Bluff or a Mesa residential ownership. The following slides show the existing condition of the neighborhood. The top image shows the drive aisle going towards the rear parking lot. The top right image is the parking lot and the view of the live-work residential units. So this next slide shows views taken from the rear of the property, with the right image showing the main entry to the suite and the roll-up door. As you enter the suite, the top image shows the view of the existing axe throwing facility. It was first implemented as a prototype for other businesses. The bottom image shows the check-in and shop counter. The top image is taken from the interior rear of the suite, which shows the roll-up door and will be closed and filled from the exterior to buffer any noise. The bottom image is your typical axe lane and board built per the National Axe Throwing Federation guidelines. As mentioned earlier, the existing 3,600 square feet auto repair occupies the front of the building, which is shown in blue. The 2,500 square feet office space behind it in yellow there, and the attached and detached personal storage, of which 600 square feet will be demolished, shown in red. So to give a brief history of the actual space, the design build firm operated within the space. Then the business owner moved the main office to LA thereafter. The owner used the empty space as, again, a prototype for building axe throwing, as well as personal storage. And in November 2018, the city received complaint regarding noise and recreational operation. The owner ceased operation in January 2019, and in June 2019, the applicant applied for a conditional use permit. This slide shows the main use consisting of 8 lanes denoted in purple in the middle. Ancillary areas such as storage shown in green, counter and waiting area in red, and the lounge shown in blue. So during the operation, there would be 1 expert for every 2 active lane. The expert would enforce safety protocols. Each lane would accommodate approximately 2 to 4 people. And the typical flow pattern would be that one would enter at point 1 and then check in at the front counter at point 2 and then move on to the designated demonstration area at point 3. The proposal requires a minor conditional use permit because it deviates from the parking standard due to unique operating characteristics. When a parking requirement for a use is not listed in municipal code, staff designate a parking closest to a similar use. In this case, it is similar to a bowling alley in terms of parking. With the proposed use, it would require 41 parking spaces, 2 parking spaces for each storage unit, 26 parking spaces for the axe throwing, 11 parking spaces for the auto shop. And there are 15 existing parking spaces on site. Therefore, there would be a deficit of 36 parking spaces. With the deficit, axe throwing, the applicant proposed to operate when the auto repair is closed. The required parking spaces would still be 30 spaces, 4 parking spaces for the storage, 26 parking spaces for the axe throwing facility. Still, there is a deficit of 15 parking spaces. And in that case, the applicant has proposed to operate the business when the auto repair is closed and institute a valet plan. The required spaces would still be 30 parking spaces, 4 for storage use, 26 for the axe throwing facility. The proposed valet plan allows for 29 parking spaces. It is credited with 1 parking spaces since they are proposing a bike rack. There is no deficit in parking with this approach. Therefore, the applicant would meet parking requirement using offset hours and on-site valet. Earlier in my presentation, I mentioned that the property is surrounded by mixed of uses ranging from industrial to residential use. As mentioned, the reason being is that it is located in an overlay zone, and that overlay zone is Mesa West Bluff Plan, which allows for live-work units in an industrial zone. In an industrial zone, the noise standards don't apply per code. The CCNRs associated with these live-work units acknowledges potential inconveniences associated with surrounding industrial uses. However, the business owner was willing to mitigate any noise, such as providing mat to prevent any axe noise, providing the vertical landscape wall, which is shown in purple, fill the exterior roll-up door to further buffer the noise, limit the hours of operation until 9 p.m., and there would be a condition that it needs to conduct the business indoors. To conclude, there would be minimal impact on surrounding uses and have sufficient on-site parking. It is compatible with existing industrial mix of uses. It complements the objectives of the Mesa West Bluff Plan, provides experiential services within the surrounding neighborhood. It meets the general plan and zoning code. As a preventative measure, conditions of approval has been applied, such as to conduct the business indoors, limits the hours of operation, and there will be no sale or consumption of alcoholic beverages and no food or beverage service. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution and find the project is categorically exempt under CEQA and approve PA 1918 subject to condition of approval. That concludes my presentation, and the applicant has a presentation to share.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Glupos. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mr. Glupos? Yes, Commissioner Zick, anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please, floor is yours.
So my first question has to do with the type of businesses in this general industrial zoning. And my question is, with regard to hours of operation, do we allow businesses, the general industrial businesses in this area, to operate 24/7 as a right?
There is no prohibition in code on hours of operation for industrial uses.
So relative to this statement in the staff report, I thought I saw regarding the residential development next to it. Where did I see that? Oh, that the CCNRs where the property owners there have to or are aware of and are required to acknowledge noise associated with surrounding industrial uses. That could potentially include industrial uses that are operating 24/7, correct?
It could, yes. Whether it specifically says that could operate 24 hours, I don't believe so. But there is a disclosure that each owner signs prior to purchasing a unit in this development.
Okay. And then with regard to the noise complaint that was received in 2018, do you have any more detail as to the nature of that noise, the source of the noise, and what was actually done to deal with that, other than shutting the business down, and maybe that was the way it was dealt with? What was the nature of the noise problem?
So the noise was coming from inside and as well as exterior noise. Apparently there was alcohol consumption. People were going outside and creating noise. We have conditioned that there's going to be no alcohol consumption on site.
Okay.
And Commissioner Zick, if I could
Please.
more completely answer your question, we did pull a copy of the disclosure that was included in the CCNRs. It states in general that the hours of operation of the businesses that were in place at the time, and it lists those businesses, were generally between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. And then it includes a statement as well that that the surrounding uses may cause annoyances and inconveniences, but are also subject to change in the event of a new business or existing business change in ownership.
Okay. And then with regard to this auto repair shop, and I may have to ask the applicant this question, but I'll ask you first. Are you aware, relative to their operation, if they have any requirement to store vehicles on site that may be in a multi-day repair process? In other words, will parking be used by them as part of their business, storing vehicles being repaired?
We will take a look at some records that we have for the auto repair shop. Typically, storage of vehicles in required parking spaces is not permitted for that type of use. They're either actively worked on or off of the site, and required parking is typically for employees and visitors, for example.
Okay, so as a point of reference to my question, and I don't mean to mix projects or zoning or that sort of thing, but I happen to know of a repair shop on the corner of 16th and Placentia that has a fairly good-sized yard area associated with it, where there's quite a big storage of vehicles that are in the process of being repaired, either waiting for repair or waiting for pickup. And that's just the nature of that business. And so it wouldn't surprise me if this auto repair business or similar auto repair businesses would function similarly.
I would certainly ask the applicant about the function of that particular auto repair shop. In the meantime, we will take a look at code requirements. Typically, as we've talked with this commission about in the past for past projects, outdoor uses in general are not allowed except for through a minor conditional use permit. All uses are typically required to be conducted indoors. We will take a look and see if we have anything on this specific auto shop.
Okay, and then two more questions regarding the hours of operation. So the business hours of operation end at 9 p.m. on the various different days. And to your understanding, would that closure at 9 p.m. mean that all customers are out of the building at 9 p.m., or that's just when this axe throwing would stop and maybe the patrons might be leaving at 10 p.m. or 10:30 if they're standing around bragging about their scoring or something?
So typically, hours of operation, there's nothing defined in terms of the code, but typically hours of operation are applied such that the business closes at that time, and there's an expectation that the customers are leaving the site at that time.
Okay. And then my last question has to do with the condition of approval number 8, which is on handwritten page 6. And this is relating to the indoor activity, and it specifically talks about closed doors. So I'm assuming that would refer to both the roll-up door and the man door. Would it also apply to windows being closed? Would that be the intent?
That is the intent, and we can clarify that language if that's unclear.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner, any question? Commissioner Colbert?
Just a very simple question. Could you explain the concept, just for the record, of what a live-work community is and the intent, and also if there are any noise violations typically associated with communities similar to those?
So in general, the idea with a live-work residential development is that it's a residential unit, but it also has a commercial space available for a homeowner to run a business in that unit as well. It's meant to be integrated vertical mixed use. There aren't any particular noise violations associated with live-work units. Typically, the type of businesses that are allowed in live-work are office, design, some other use of that nature.
Are there typically around this area, specifically, I guess, Mesa West, are there parking challenges that you are aware of?
There are always parking challenges in every area of the city and every neighborhood, particularly when you have areas that are redeveloping that have new residential uses in traditionally industrial areas that weren't necessarily built for a residential community. There's integration struggles. So I would say this is similar to other neighborhoods in Costa Mesa with parking challenges.
Thank you.
Commissioner Russell, any questions, or Vice Chair? Okay, quick question. So either Ms. Lee or Mr. Glupos, so prior to November of 2018, were we aware that this business or this use existed?
We were not. We were only aware once we received a complaint.
Okay, and did we check with PD to see if there were any calls for service to this property prior to November of 18 related to the axe throwing business?
We don't have police calls for service information. We did pull code enforcement complaint history, so we do have some of that information.
And can you give me a top-line briefing on that? Code enforcement, other than the noise complaint?
Looking at the code enforcement history, it was just primarily the noise complaints for this property, specifically related to axe throwing.
Okay. Then I'm looking at handwritten page 26 on the tenant improvement design, which is the valet plan. Has the fire department looked at this?
They have, transportation actually approved this valet plan.
Okay, they did. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. I will open the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward if you have a presentation, sir. Good evening. If I could have your name and address for the record?
Good evening, Jesse Fowler. And name it, I'm sorry, what else?
Your name and address.
And address, 2020 Placentia here.
Okay, very good.
John, I don't think, so based on, we weren't entirely sure what his presentation was going to be, so ours is now going to be redundant. He did a great job. So nothing really for us to go over. I think, I'm sure you'll have questions, so I can defer the presentation and answer questions when ready.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have questions? Commissioner Russell, Commissioner Colbert, and then Commissioner Zick.
Everybody.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of questions. One of the questions I had is, can you talk a little bit about safety protocols and how are the experts trained? Because, I mean, it seems to me that for this to go forward successfully, those people have to have a really good handle on controlling the group. And so can you just talk about some of those kinds of things?
Yeah, so learning about this, and I had no idea what axe throwing was a year ago until I took a trip to Canada and found out that it was a thing that's a lot of fun. So there are two governing bodies, and we chose one that was the safest. So there's the WATL and there's the NATF, I believe it's called. Within those governing bodies, they have safety protocol on how experts are supposed to be trained, how they're supposed to have safety equipment nearby, how they're supposed to teach people how to throw the axes. And ultimately, while it seems like a very dangerous venture, there are now thousands of these that have opened up across the country. Part of it is it's implied that it's dangerous. There's very few issues that happen. A lot of the axe places that open up don't have an expert or a person that's there to monitor safety on site. They give you a lane and a bucket of axes and let you go at it. We chose to have an expert on site for safety reasons. It helps our insurance premiums. It's a better way to do business. But ultimately, it's not as nasty as it may seem, frankly. I think that's part of the appeal.
What kind of training do they actually have? Is there a certification process? Or?
No certification. Everything. Since it's a new concept and a new business, it typically takes an expert about 2 weeks to learn how to, shadow, train. In essence, it's how to properly throw an axe, which realistically takes about 5 minutes. Where to stand, and the most important thing is, so there are lines, caution lines that are painted around the lanes. The most important thing is making sure people don't cross those lines when somebody's throwing. Because if you see from the pictures, it's a huge caged metal and wood structure. It's pretty difficult to get hurt doing that if nobody is within that section. So a safety person is going to stand there between two axe throwers and ensure that nobody crosses the line when the other person's throwing.
Yeah, the other question I had, so there was some talk, we got some emails, et cetera, about alcohol being consumed there, and how are you going to control that? And specifically people that have been drinking before they come onto the property.
Yeah, so before we tried this prototype, I have a restaurant in Redlands, familiar with ABC. We contacted our attorney for that, and BYOB, he said, would have been, is fine in the space. We're going to take out BYOB and all alcohol, so it's not going to be a factor. You know, like any bar, I mean, our experts are not going to be trained in having an eye for people that are intoxicated that come to our space. We don't have a training protocol in place for gauging the level of intoxication for a person coming in. I think that's probably, if anything, a judgment call. If you guys would like us to institute something on a business like this, we're happy to look into it. There's just no protocol that I would know how to reference for that, frankly. Like any other business like this, we're not going to be serving drinks, so it's tough to say what we would do for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Colbert.
I think a couple of my questions have been answered, but one question that I have that kind of stands out is, what was your reasoning for not pursuing a permit to operate initially?
I'm sorry, for not pursuing?
Yes.
I never thought of it. I never thought it would work in the space. I thought there would be parking constraints. You know, ultimately, we had most of our design team working out of that space, or some of them we've been in that space for, I think, 6 years now. And so designers were out of that space, and as we moved designers to other offices and outsourced portions of our drafting team, it turned into a big storage unit. So once I came back from Canada, I had a great time. You know, a few months later, I went and visited places back east. You know, I tried to figure out what was this all about. And we started to say, well, we don't like the other concepts that are out there. Let's just kind of start to build some stuff as a prototype and see if we like the look and create a brand and see if we can create something that we can take somewhere else. And ultimately, after we moved junk out of the way, the space was ideal for 8 lanes. It just happened to work out that way. So we didn't realize that until we started playing around.
Okay, so you just weren't aware of the process. And then when you became aware of the process, were you, after the permit or the complaint was made, did you continue operations or immediately cease operations?
Yeah, so we contacted our attorney. There was back and forth for a number, I mean, this has been a year old now, right? So there was back and forth with the city and planning for a number of months. Mm-hmm. We felt like originally, and the counsel we got was that the complaints were not fully valid because of what they sign off on when they buy those places. Certainly, we don't want to have a contentious relationship with our neighbors, but at the same time, we feel that we should be allowed to do business within the constraints of what was signed. So, you know, to accommodate that and to fight against that, of course, we're sealing off the space, we're insulating more, we're going to do added construction to make sure the noise doesn't get out. But, you know, we must have been here 5 or 6 or 7 times coming back and saying, well, how about this? How about this? This doesn't make sense to us. We don't feel like this is fair. And then, of course, when we couldn't go anywhere with that, because the hope was to go through the CUP process while we were still doing business. Once we couldn't do that anymore, then we shut the doors, and hence we are 10 months later.
Okay, makes sense. You alluded to parking issues being one of the challenges that existed when the initial operation took place. What were those challenges, and do you think that the proposed parking or valet strategy that we have before us mitigates that?
Yeah, so a couple things. Commissioner Zeich mentioned, Zik? So the challenges had to do with the auto body place up front and the way that the area was striped. The building owner, I do not own the building. The building owner is taking out 2 large storage units as well. So if we get approved, he's demoing those storage units. And we're going to fill those in with, I think that gets us 8 spaces, I believe. And then restriping the other spaces gets us the rest of the way there. I didn't, again, because we didn't have an intention of going through the traditional process with this, it was more of a prototype. I didn't really even pursue it. I didn't think it was an option. I thought we were going to go elsewhere. Once, again, we felt it was viable, then we dug in for the parking.
Okay. And my last question is related to game times. Commissioner Zik alluded to this. However, I wanted to understand what the average game time would be for, I know there's like a 15-minute gap that has been instituted.
I think it's a 10-minute gap. I could be wrong on that. But
it's 15 per the
15,
step.
okay, yeah.
Okay.
So there's a gap between, which allows game times to be, you know, traditionally they're 30 minutes to an hour, so we would probably, you know, shave a little bit off each side and, you know, go 23 and 23, or, you know, the whole 45-minute section.
So the proposed last game would be 8:30 p.m.?
I'm sorry, the proposal is going to be 8:30 PM, yeah. Now, what tends to happen in this and why we think it's still a viable business with the reduced hours is, and with, no outside beverage, is because this is we had nonstop corporate people coming in. They'll rent it out for the whole space, the whole time. So we'll likely sell in 3-hour blocks or 4-hour blocks or whatever the time is. I don't think we're going to have to do as much, piecemeal work.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Zick.
Thank you. So my first question has to do with these pictures that are on my screen. Is this showing what your facility currently looks like right now?
You looking at the pictures I'm looking at?
Probably with people holding and throwing axes and
Okay.
targets and lanes.
So if there are these pictures, then,
There's 3 pictures up. One
Gotcha.
picture is 3 gentlemen's.
well, that's me without a sunburn. That's my Uncle John, and that's Uncle Casey.
Okay, so we're looking at the same pictures.
So,
That's-
yeah, so we're looking at the same pictures. This is part of our presentation was we didn't understand how much knowledge you would have, so we were going to talk about the history of how we came to this. So this is actually the place in Canada we first went to. This is not our facility. If we scroll down here, if you want to see pictures of what our facility looks like, da, 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 da. That's our facility now. Less storage and boxes that are in there. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. You mentioned a building owner, presumably not you. Is the entire property then under one lease, and that is to you?
No, it's segmented with the auto body shop up front and then us in the back.
Okay. So I'll simply ask you a question about the auto body shop, just based on your understanding of their operation, recognizing you're not responsible for them, you're not them.
Yeah.
Do they have vehicles that they repair and hold overnight and store in the parking lot?
So it's a two-part answer. The answer is yes, but the answer is yes because we haven't needed the other parking. So our facility would tell us now is unnecessary. So I think what they do, for context, Sleepers it's not a traditional auto body shop. They work on custom high-end Porsches mainly. They have a deal with Porsche. And so, the cars are expensive. They can't risk leaving those cars outside all night long. So what they do is they load up, 10 or 12 cars, and they can fit those in their space at the end of every night. What they would traditionally or sometimes leave out would be, employees' cars, beat up junkers, whatever, that would sort of sit there that didn't really have liability. But they certainly don't leave out, nor could they leave out a $200,000 custom Porsche in the parking lot. So they don't do that. If there's cars that they left there, it was just because we didn't have an issue with it. We just said, it was never an issue, never a problem for us.
So since you don't own that business and you don't own their lease, how can you be confident that you'll have access to their parking space
Because they
for
have
your
access,
operation?
because they have access to ours during the day. So our agreement with them is when they take all the cars out, we're not open until 6 o'clock. They get our spaces until 6 o'clock, and we get their spaces afterwards.
So let me ask you the question a little bit differently. Does your lease specify the designation of a certain number of parking stalls, a location of specific stalls, or is the property open parking?
Both leases specify a certain number of stalls. How the stalls get remapped when we redo the parking plan, if we do, I'm not sure how that pans out, but we'll be renting the extra spaces in terms of our lease. So our lease will, the point being, the lease will change when we remap the parking structure. So currently, both, there's a parking A and there's a parking B. And we just say, you use ours when we're not here, and we use yours when you're not here. But since we're not doing anything there now, the whole place is going to get remapped. And so we'll be revising our lease, as will they, under the new parking arrangement.
That answers my question. I'll have another one for you later, most likely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Vice Chair, do you have any questions?
Actually, I just had one quick question relative to the parking. So I'm looking in the staff report, and it says your hours of operation are supposed to coincide with the off times of the auto repair shop. So it says your hours would be Tuesday through Saturday, 6 to 9 p.m. So that makes sense. But Sunday and Monday, it's 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. So the body shop is closed.
Closed Monday.
That time. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Okay. So my question, prior to the city's becoming aware that this use was in existence prior to November of 18, when did you actually set all this up?
Took 6 months, and we played around with it from June through November, I'd say.
So from June of 2018 to November 2018, you were setting up these lanes as they exist now?
Well, again, we were trying to see where else we could do this business, and we were running a design build company. So this is it's a pet project on the side. The space was virtually empty. So we would put a lane up, char the wood, play around with the metal, but it wasn't functioning in any way. And
You had no customers
there
coming in?
were no customers, no events, no.
Have you seen the correspondence we received from some of the neighbors
Yes,
today? And some of the Yelp reviews?
the
So-
five-star Yelp reviews.
Yeah, so, well, no, and also the ones that said you can bring your own booze.
I didn't see that. Okay, so
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Who was using this thing between June and November that you would have Yelp reviews and complaints of noise and
I don't thi-
if it wasn't
I don't think
being
those Yelp
used?
reviews were in June. I think that I would.
Well, you weren't operating after January of 19, correct? Because you got a complaint and the city came and said,
Correct.
What's
Yeah.
going on?
So I'm talking 2018, right?
Right, so,
2019, we stopped in January.
okay, so you began setting this up in June of
Yeah.
18, and you were running it through November of 18, or a little bit after.
No, we were running it from November through January. Maybe late October, I don't know the exact date, but the gap was from my trip to Canada was in February. We started to play around with this in probably June.
So when I see a Yelp review dated October 25th, 18, this place is a hidden gem. My friends and I had a stellar time. It was so different and unique, a great competitive way to bond and try something new, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, the best part is BYOB. So I'm saying is if you weren't open for business, who are these people?
No, I'm saying we weren't open. That's October. So like I said, November or October, whatever it is, but we weren't open prior to that. Maybe it was the last week in October. I'm not sure when we first started. We can find out. But my point is that from June through November is what I thought the opening time was. We had no business. There was no business. There was nothing functional. So maybe that's the first review we had, or maybe it was the second week in October. I'm just not sure what that date was.
And so, apart from you, who was kind of the brainchild behind this and setting it all up?
I had a partner who did the marketing and branding, and then we had a partner that was running the facility.
And it didn't occur to them that you ought to check with the city to see if what you were setting up might not be,
Clearly not.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. I have no further questions right now. Anyone else? Thank you, sir. We're going to
Thank you.
open the public hearing, public comment portion of the public hearing. Anybody wish to speak to this item, please come to the podium. You do not have to state your name and address for the record, but for our dear sweet Julie, it makes her life easier if you do. You have 3 minutes. Yes, sir.
3 minutes. Okay, it's Louis Jaquin, and the address is 778 Wonder Lane. So unless I'm missing it somewhere, what I'm not seeing is a area map that shows where our property is. So if you look at this plan, we would be on the bottom parallel, and the entry and exit for this facility is in the little 90-degree corner here where it widens for parking. And essentially that acts as a natural amphitheater for the sound to get projected into our development. So it just makes it worse, right? You've got operable windows on the exterior facing us. I understand now that he's going to infill the roll-up door, which is also a real big issue, but you're going to have to set this up like a gun range, right? Every wall, the ceiling is all going to need soundproofing, and there's going to need to be some sort of man trap at the entry, because every time you open up the door and the axe hits the plywood, it's loud. It doesn't stop. You've got 8 lanes with people throwing axes. It's loud. So my other issue, you know, I'm a general contractor, and this doesn't even come close on parking. So sleepers, you know, the economy's booming. A lot of people are buying Porsches and making fast cars. That shop is packed. It's packed, and they're working late to keep up. So they're not all out of there by 6 o'clock. And I don't understand where all these people are going to go, other than maybe park in our development, which already has limited parking. And if you go up half a block to 20th Street, it's all full of apartments, and all the street parking is full. So I don't know where they're going to valet these people in and out of here. It doesn't make any sense. And as a general contractor, I have no idea how this path of travel is going to work and ADA parking. It's impossible. So you can try. I think we've already had our test run last year, and we saw how well it went. It wasn't good. So summer comes along, and we want to have our windows open in our bedrooms at night, and we all get up early. We go to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock, and it's a stream of people coming in and out and clapping each other on the back because, honestly, it looks like a lot of fun. It's going to be busy. So I think it's a great idea. It looks like a lot of fun. This just is not the right spot for it. It's just, it doesn't fit. So I think oh, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Sure.
On the lower picture, left-hand side, there are 3 buildings to the left and 4 to the right.
Yes.
You don't have to answer my question. If you want to, that's fine. Can you tell me which of those buildings, left or right, is your property?
I am on the very bottom of the screen. I'm on the back corner, bottom left. So
farthest
I'm
left.
across our drive aisle, right?
There's 7 buildings there.
Right.
I'm asking which of the 7 buildings.
I'm on the next row down that you can just see the top of.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're not adjacent to the property.
I'm not adjacent.
Thank you, Louis.
And it's
Appreciate
loud
it.
at my house.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Are you done?
Oh, can
Yes,
I make one more point, by the way?
Okay, quickly, please.
This is all going to ramp up just as all of us come home from work. And everybody in the residential area off of 20th Street is trying to find parking in the apartments.
Got the message. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Barry Fisher. I had some concerns, like the previous speaker, regarding the noise coming from this facility when it's in operation every time the door is open. This, if you've ever been outside a bowling alley when the door opens, a bar that hosts dart tournaments when the door opens, this is going to be worse. I mean, but I don't see anything mitigating that noise of every time the door opens and closes. And you know, people will be going in and out. The other thing I don't quite get, this valet parking. These cars stacked practically on top of each other. Yes, it does allow them to meet the parking requirements. But do you know how many times the valet guys are going to be opening and closing the doors of these cars, moving them, backing them up, shuffling them around as people come and go during the business hours that this place is in operation? I don't know. I see a lot of outside noise to this going on. My other, not so much of a concern, but my question would be, if the applicant was looking for a different location rather than this, and this was just playing around, if you approve this with the CUPs and the minor CUP, don't those stay with that property, that land? If he moves his business due to outside noises and this and that, and it's just too much of a hassle, and he goes somewhere else larger, away from residential, these CUPs will remain with the land, and then he has to go and start the process all over again at his new location. I'm kind of iffy about that, because this is tailoring things to his business that may or may not be there, since he's only using this as, I get the feeling, a test area. Anyway, that's just my concerns. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Mark Perkins, also live here in Costa Mesa, not near this project. One of the things when I was reading the staff report and the letter from the applicant is obviously there's parking challenges here, and there was talk about trying to encourage Uber and ride sharing and whatnot to this location. Given the proximity of residential, I was wondering what type of encouragement there would be for folks who are walking or biking. I see there's a bike path, bike rack included. I was wondering, when you're looking at this, walking in through that narrow pathway on the north side, I didn't see very much lighting or signage that would encourage people potentially in the local neighborhood to know how to walk into this area. So I thought that might be one of the ways to help mitigate parking a little bit, would be to help encourage people walking into the facility, because they're going to have to walk down this sort of narrow, almost industrial looking place to get through the front door. So I just wanted to wonder if there was anything in the plan for that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Stephanie Reimer, 782 Wonder Lane. I am part of the Brickyard East community. If you look at the diagram here of the houses where letter B is, there's an opening there. My house is right across from that opening. So I have direct line to any noise that comes from this facility. I am actually one of the people that did call in a complaint to the police department. I don't remember when it was. I think it was probably in the November, December timeframe. And I'm also here on behalf of my neighbor who sent the email. She's traveling for business. There was a situation where code enforcement actually came out with the police department, and they camped out in our parking lot to really witness the noise and what was happening. And this was probably at about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. So my biggest concern, obviously, is the noise. And the woman that just spoke a couple minutes ago did bring up the concern about people coming out, being very excited. It's like leaving a bar. It's very loud. We're all professionals there. We all go to bed early. We all wake up very early. And the last thing that we want is to be woken up by people that are really excited about throwing axes. The other concern that I have is with the parking. Obviously, if there aren't parking spaces or people do get lost and they're not sure where they're driving, they could come into our community and end up parking in one of those spots. And then it takes up spots for our guests or some of our residents who may not be parking in their garage. And then the other thing that I'm concerned about is the alcohol consumption. I do understand that they're saying that they're not going to allow it and they're not going to allow any BYOB. However, I have a concern on how that will be monitored and whether or not it will actually be enforced.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
When the Costa Mesa Police Department code enforcement were out monitoring, do you remember when that was? What time was it? What month, year?
I want to say it was probably November or December of 2018, but okay. I don't know for certain.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Anyone else? Cut myself off. I hate when I do that. Yes, sir.
Hello, David Hartley, 779 Wonder Lane. So if you look, I'm right at the lower left there, adjacent to the property. So in the lower left, next to the alley. So I guess one of my big concerns is just the disregard for the process. The applicant is a restaurateur and a member of a build design firm who I would imagine would understand the rules and regulations that they would need to ultimately follow when they're doing this. So I'm concerned at the...
Oh, I'm sorry. You're back on. Hold on a second. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm concerned about sort of the disregard for the rules and regulations sort of up to this point, especially as it comes to things like alcohol use and other things. There were multiple times where there were outdoor facilities where they had outdoor food trucks and a bar set up on multiple occasions. So it's, you know, sort of it's in contrast to what the applicant has been saying earlier. I would like to point out on page 13, handwritten 13 of the document, one of the things is they encourage people to take quote unquote party buses. I'm now a father of 2 small children who go to sleep early, so I'm not taking very many party buses, but just the connotation of what that's looking at is troubling to me. So thank you very much. And
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, sir. If there's anyone else who wishes to speak to that, could you come to the other podium as well so we can kind of move relatively quickly? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Ollie Sondry, and I live at 780 Wonder Lane. I've moved in just a few months ago, so I wasn't there when all this activity was going on earlier, but speaking to my neighbors, the constant pounding of the axe throwing and then the subsequent noise of the after party is certainly causing me great concern that this is going to start up again. And then I do appreciate the time spent to educate us on the process here, but to see, I believe it's going to be 30 cars valley parked, squeezed in sort of like sardines. I'm just envisioning the the noise associated with moving those cars around constantly. The idea of no alcohol being served, I suspect a lot of people may show up to this event already having had a few drinks if they know that there's not going to be drinks involved there. And just the very tight parking situation, cars close together going up that alley, perhaps people already having had a few drinks when they show up, then going in to throw axes that right next to a residential area. I just think that this is an inherently bad idea. It looks like a lot of fun, but the location right next to a residential area, I think, is a very poor choice of location. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair. Yes, sir. The Vice Chair has a question for you.
Sir, 2 quick questions. So how long have you lived at the Brickyard?
7 months now.
Okay, it's a work, sorry, 3 questions. It's a live-work unit?
Yes, that's correct.
And so what is the work portion of your unit?
The first floor is set up for a work portion. I don't use it as a work portion currently. In fact, I believe most of my neighbors, although it's zoned for live work, we typically, I don't think most of the neighbors are using it as a full-time work. It might just be a personal office.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, I will close the public comment portion of the public hearing and ask the applicant to come back up. If there's any additional information you would like to provide, I do have an additional question or 2 for you.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm looking at your floor plan. It's actually, that's your site plan, but it has some detailing on the interior of the facility, and it handwritten page 26. And it lists a lounge and a sitting bar. So what goes on there? And well, I guess I should ask a question. You don't plan on serving any kind of food or beverage?
No. Previously, we had snacks we give people that were prepackaged. There's no kitchen. There's no ability to serve food or beverage.
So what's the? I can understand having a lounge while people are waiting, but there's a sitting bar. What's supposed to happen there?
Honestly, we don't know at this point. I mean, it's how the prototype was designed. We're going to have to find some other sort of use. Right now, it's the place where there's a TV that is up, and likely we'll make it something else. It's probably not the most effective thing to have there.
So the other thing I'm curious about is you've been calling this a prototype, which I get.
Yeah.
What have you been testing?
Well, we're testing it right now, right? We're testing the viability of an axe business that didn't exist anywhere in California when we first started. So the fact that this is in Canada and was back east, and there were 3 locations nationally, I think, when we first started this process, or 10, or it's a small number, nothing near us. So we didn't know if one, how difficult it was going to be to build. 2, if there's going to be any interest whatsoever. 3, the hard costs associated with constructing.
Understand.
Yeah.
And so do you have a written shared parking agreement with the automotive business up front, or is it just verbal?
It's verbal, again, it's verbal, but the leases will completely change when we restripe. So that's going to be up to Gary, who owns the building, but the leases will change because there's now going to be 36 spaces versus whatever's there now.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you. So the question I have for you is a hypothetical, because I don't know where this is going to go. But in our package conditions of approval on handwritten page 6.
And Commissioner Zick, if I could interrupt you for a minute, because I forgot a parliamentary procedure. Did you read the conditions of approval? Mm-hmm. Do you agree with them?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm referring then to condition of approval number 3, and I'll read to you the way it is written, and I want to get your reaction to some alternate language. Okay. The way it's written is that the hours of operation of the business shall be limited to between Tuesday through Saturday from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. and Sunday and Monday from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m., and here's the operative part, when other on-site businesses are not in operation. Goes on to say, minor adjustments in the approved hours of operation that meet the intent of this condition may be granted with written approval of the Director of Development Services. And I want to get your reaction to a language that would be substituted for the line that says, when other businesses are not in operation, making that a little stronger statement that would say, no other businesses at this address shall be open or operating at these times.
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So question of, so sir, let me, so you're not the property owner. You're the leaseholder of,
Correct. Of the unit in the back, Telus Design and
but
Build.
not the automotive.
Correct.
Okay. So my question would be that you just agreed to Commissioner Zick's condition change. You're willing to comply with it, but we don't know that the property owner or the other leaseholder are willing to comply with it.
Correct, yeah. And so the fact that the leases are going to have to be redone with parking, I'm fine with it, obviously, but it's not our issue.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Commissioner Colbert.
I just have one addition, and I thought Commissioner Zick and Byron are going to both, Mr. Chairman, we're going to both speak to this, but is it possible to add within condition number 3 that the last game will begin at 8:30 p.m. and no games will begin thereafter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, I think that we're going to sell those as, regardless of how the parking lays out, it doesn't make sense for us to sell those as 30-minute games, right? We're going to sell them and batch them in terms of a party bus. A party bus is a big van, right? It's not implying that people are going to come there drunk, but we're going to batch those together to large groups more than likely.
And my second question, just based off of, and out of curiosity, based off of a statement you made earlier, now that you realize that this is a viable business, do you foresee moving it or relocating it?
I foresee adding locations. It's a viable business. I'd love to have a place we can have open all the time. Mm-hmm. We put so much time into this and now effort into this, and it was a working business that I'd like to keep it a working business, but obviously with severely limited hours. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that this was such a big issue for the people that live next door. I'm not there on site. I'm not running the facility. That sucks, and I'm sorry. And I'm in a quandary because I feel like, one, we want to be a good neighbor. We've been there for a long time with zero issues. And we run a design build firm. And we could be in there pounding wood and nails. And can I just finish? Yeah. We can pound wood and nails until 9 o'clock at night. And that would be okay. And I just, while I am very sympathetic, I also feel that it's a little bit unfair that we're getting held to, it seems like a different standard here, or that's the implication.
Got it. Thank you. This question is really towards staff, and you may be able to answer it as well. What additional businesses, if any, on the East Coast did you all research when this?
What additional businesses or what?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
you said that there were some businesses located on the East Coast similar to this, axe throwing facilities. Did staff research, or did you discuss any of those facilities with staff? Just in relation to parking, to understand.
With our staff, I'm sorry, with their staff?
Jennifer and John Willie.
Yeah, that's part of, so you mean how parking worked in Philadelphia, for example?
More so if they experienced similar challenges, and what were those challenges?
We've been talking to staff and John Willie for 10 months, so I think we've gone over every aspect of that. And the reason why we structured our business the way we did was from feedback from the NAFT, which has, 100 or so or 200 axe throwing facilities throughout the country. They gave us better information on how to structure.
Got it.
Yeah.
Jennifer, are there any, for the northern part of this property, I noticed that, what are the allowed uses, and would they be similar in noise for an general industrial property on the north or south?
So this is an MG zone property, so it's light industrial. Auto repair shops are typical. Any sort of industrial or warehousing uses are typical. Also, special uses like these are allowable with a conditional use permit.
So similar, if this business and one business with similar noise would be allowable in this?
It would. I think this type of entertainment type use is unique, and that's why it requires a conditional use permit. But it gives the Planning Commission discretion to consider the unique operating characteristics.
Thank you.
One more question from me, and then we'll be finished, I think, unless other commissioners. So when you were operating previously, was alcohol permitted consumption of alcohol permitted on the property?
Yes, BYOB was permitted. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Commissioners, any final questions of staff? I think Commissioner Zick has one.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
All right.
Chairman. So my question has to do with our conditions of approval and I guess the mechanics or the effectiveness of how they work. What I mean is that these conditions of approval apply to this applicant's business only, not the entire property, not the auto repair business, correct?
The conditional use permit runs with the land, so technically the conditions of approval do as well, but the conditions were written with a specific business in mind.
So, okay, so the conditions of approval would run with the land, but since this is referring specifically to this particular premises, which is in these diagrams, the building owner, if this business were to shut down and move on, the property owner, if he wanted to set up a similar business, would only be able to set it up within the confines of these premises, not in a different location on that property? Would that be a true statement?
That is correct.
Okay. So the question I'm getting to is the idea of a requirement that essentially says that the auto repair business has to be closed down in order for this business to functionally operate with regard to parking. Yet this applicant doesn't own the building, doesn't lease the entire property, and can only speak, has only a controlling interest in his own business. So if we were to say as a condition of approval, you can only operate when everyone else is shut down, and one of the other businesses says, well, I'm still going to be open, then this business would not be able to operate based on what the conditions of approval say. And so I'm trying to understand, he can't speak for them, yet we'll put a condition of approval on that almost pretends that he can. So I'm trying to understand, and maybe it's almost a legal question, but I'm trying to understand how that would work.
I'll try to respond, and if our attorney's office can add to what I have to say, that would be great. The conditional use permit runs with the land. The application for this use is signed by the property owner, and they authorize an agent to work with the city on their behalf. They have authorized this applicant to work on their behalf. So from a legal perspective, from our standpoint, this authorized agent of the property owner does speak for the property owner. Having said that, that is a question that I would ask directly of this applicant to confirm that that's his understanding and that he has had discussions with the property owner. Notwithstanding, Willie had conversations with the property owner directly, specifically about the parking requirements and the conditions of approval related to parking. So we did make that direct connection with the property owner.
So if we had a condition, we don't have a condition of approval that says what I had, wordsmithed out, but if that were one of the conditions of approval, you're saying the property owner is the one who would have to sign and essentially agree to all these conditions. And he would be the one who would have to ensure that there's no conflict, or that he can manage the conflict between this applicant and any other tenants of his property.
That is our expectation because the permit is with the property owner.
Got it. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Before I close the public hearing, Vice Chair Harlan has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question relates to the CCNRs. So I understand that the CCNRs for the Brickyard East contain a provision requiring notice to a prospective occupant of the noise issues. And that's actually directly related to the Mesa Bluffs overlay. What I want to know is there something in the CCNRs that also requires or obligates the occupant to use the work unit as a work unit?
I will admit that I did not read the entire CCNRs for Brickyard East, but it is typical for us not to include that as a requirement. It's an expectation of live-work units, but most of our live-work units are designed and constructed to be able to accommodate that use, but the use is not required.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I will close the public hearing and see if the commissioners have any final comments or motions. Anyone? Final Jeopardy music is playing. Commissioner Colbert.
I guess before we move into the vote, I just wanted to state that this is obviously a business type that is not, we're not accustomed to. This is new. I think it's new for everyone, specifically those living and adjacent to the area, as well as the potential operator. It's obviously upsetting to a lot of people due to the difficulty and the type of operation that it is. And I must admit that this is one that has been a difficult decision to weigh in. But I think that the conversations that have taken place with staff, specifically as it relates to the mixed use, the noise, and the parking types, were strong attempts to mitigate and solve for the challenges that we've heard this evening. And so I just wanted to state that I think staff and hopefully as uses like this continue to become more prevalent throughout the community with such residential adjacencies, that we begin to think about implementing or what we can do to kind of mitigate noise or parking, which is a challenge that we experience all over the city, and other challenges that come with living in mixed-use communities. So I just wanted to say that before we move forward with a vote, and if there are no other comments, I may make the motion.
Commissioner Colbert, I'll probably have some comments, but if you'd like to make a motion, go ahead and punch the make motion button, and you want to actually read your motion into the record, and then we'll go from there.
You can make it, and you can make comments, and then I'll.
Okay, well, so any other commissioners have comments on the application before we move? Commissioner Russell.
Yeah, this has been a challenging one for me from the perspective that it's something new and different, and no one's done it. So how you got here is probably a little bit less of an issue. And on the west side, we kind of want to be known as an innovative area. I am concerned about the impact of on the brickyard, and I don't know what else you can do to mitigate that. On one hand, they knew coming in that it was going to be a little bit more noisy than perhaps other quieter residential, 100% residential areas, and just that. This has just been very challenging, and I feel like you've done everything you can, and you've worked with the city, and that I'm going to ultimately support this, but it's been a hard decision. So.
Okay, anyone else? Commissioner Zick, does anybody have a motion, or we just? Commissioner Zick, go ahead.
I will make a motion, which may help some of the discussion. So I move that we deny approval of this application for conditional use permit. And if there's a second, I will elaborate on my rationale.
I will second for discussion.
So let me first talk about noise. There's a concern about noise. Residents adjacent have talked about it. I'm sympathetic to that issue. We received correspondence from an individual who indicates that he or she lives at the Brickyard, and included in their correspondence was a link to Dropbox with a variety of videos showing and illustrating with audio the kind of noise that comes from this business when it was in operation. I wouldn't like that noise next to my house. But I'll be honest with you, I would have never bought a property that is on Placentia in the middle of an industrial area. You did. And you did that with your eyes wide open, knowing what the area was, knowing what the CCNR said. So if there's noise in the area, I don't like it, but that's why I'm not there. So sympathetic to the noise, but that isn't why I recommend denial of the project. I'm concerned a little bit that the applicant was operating this business without proper city approvals. Should he have known better? Maybe. But I'm not holding that against him either. And that isn't the reason why I'm recommending a denial, because he has applied, he's put his operation out here, city has evaluated it, studied it, and has made some recommendations. The reason why I don't like this project is because of the parking and the parking plan, and my feeling that it is wholly inadequate and impractical. The idea that other businesses at this property won't be able to operate when this one is, so this business can use their parking, just sounds impractical to me. The other business agrees to it, the property owner agrees to it, that's fine, that's their business. Seems impractical to me. The logistics of this kind of a valet parking operation seems very cumbersome to me, but I'm not a parking valet expert. It just looks very cumbersome to me. And if it looks cumbersome and impractical to me, it probably is going to be cumbersome and impractical to some people that might want to go to this business and might be concerned that once their car is buried 3 or 4 deep, it may just be very inconvenient to get out of there when their game is done. So rather than park here, where are they going to park? Down on 20th Street, over on Wallace Street. There'll be spillover. Maybe they'll park in your guest parking. Maybe they'll park across the street in the parking lot of some other property owner that maybe is shut down at that time of day. Doesn't mean it's okay to use their parking lot. That's what I'm concerned about. I don't think it's reasonable that this parking plan legitimately supports this business in a way that will not impact the surrounding properties. For that reason, I'm against this project and will not support it.
Okay, and I seconded the motion. I have some comments. I will be supporting that motion for the following reasons. Many of the reasons Commissioner Zick pointed out. Principally, we've had to jump over 2 hurdles to get to an area where we're still 15 parking spaces deficient, even after jumping over 2 hurdles, which tells me we're playing a game of Tetris here, and it's not working. And I'm worried that whatever valet, unless they're magicians and they can levitate cars and move them without, you're going to have a constant backing out and moving and shuffling of cars on a really popular night for this that I just think doesn't work for me from a parking perspective. I think it may be that the operation of the valet might be more disruptive and irritating to the Brickyard residents than the actual throwing of the axes, which, by the way, my daughter's done many times and she says it's a lot of fun. So I don't have a lot of problem with that part of the business. So anyway, the parking is the principal issue. I got to tell you, though, I got to feel like the applicant is flying at Mach 2 with his head out the window. I just don't get a sense that they're quite figured it out yet. Just, it's a prototype and we wanted to do it here. And we didn't think, we didn't know that the city might have some requirements. And yet he's a restaurateur and you got to get permits to run. And I just feel like it's I just feel like they're not organized. And given the nature of the business, I mean, this isn't darts, this isn't Nerf ball, this is axes that people are throwing. Had it been me and I was operating the business and I had an attorney who was managing my risk, I would say, do not let anybody near alcohol when they're handling these things. And yet it happened. So I'm not trying to make a judgment about who you are as a person or as a professional. I just don't get a sense that, this is all kind of being done on the fly. And for the nature of the business, it doesn't exist in Costa Mesa in a zone where it's not specifically allowed. And you're asking us to approve a parking plan that's 15 deficient. And we have neighbors who clearly don't want it. I'm having a hard time figuring out why this would be a good idea, so I'm going to support the motion. Anyone else? Guess not. So we'll call for the question on the motion. Do we have everybody, Julie?
That motion carried 4-1 with Vice Chair Harlan voting no and Commissioner Torje absent.
Okay, and
I think there's mistaken.
so if we can clear the board
Counsel
again.
that?
So we'll revote because I want it to be recorded properly. Okay, so the motion on the floor is to deny, and please cast your votes.
So that motion failed 2-3 with Commissioner Russell, Colbert, and Harlan voting no.
Okay, is there a motion for then approval, which would be the alternative?
Yeah. Sorry, should have been prepared. I move to recommend that we find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per CEQA guidelines, section 15301, existing facilities, and approved planning application 19-18, subject to conditions of approval related to condition number 3, being that the modification Commissioner Zick recommended earlier related to business operations and the parking compliance, in addition to that no games are operated after the 8:30 hour.
Okay, and Commissioner Colbert has entered his motion in the queue. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Russell. Any comments on the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Zick.
Just again, for the record, I'd like to read the language that I had proposed in condition of approval 3 that...
Please, yes.
And then as I do that, to verify with the maker of the motion that this language is acceptable. And it is to substitute out the phrase, "when other on-site businesses are not in operation," and replace it with a sentence that says, "no other businesses at this address other than AXT Throwing may be open or operating at the same time." Is that language acceptable to the maker of the motion?
That language is friendly. Thank you.
Second, is the second amenable?
Yes.
Okay,
And I have some comments.
okay, Commissioner Zick, and then Vice Chair Harlan.
So I will not be supporting the motion for the reasons I already stated. I feel for the property owner, the residential property owners adjacent, but I've explained, you made your decision. I would have made a different decision about where I live. I agree with the chairman's characterization and concerns about the nature of this business, but it's your business. And however it is you want to run it, that's up to you. It either is profitable and successful or it isn't, and that's kind of the way capitalism and owning the business and the risk associated with it works. But you've got conditions of approval that are fairly restrictive, that you're going to be held to, and I have no doubt that the neighbors are going to be helpful in holding you to those. I say good luck to your business. I don't like your parking plan, though, so I won't be supporting the motion.
Okay, Vice Chair Harlan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, like some of my colleagues had already said, this was not an easy decision. This gave us a fair amount to chew on tonight. I do agree that the applicant has worked pretty diligently with staff. I think this is a unique operation, and they've put together a plan that I feel certainly I could live with and is appropriate. I do not share my colleagues to the left's concern about parking. I think that's not really the issue here. Parking is always, in many people's mind, a game of Tetris. How do you kind of move in spaces? But it's a dynamic system. That's just how we operate. So I don't think you can try and regulate it as much as we do. What I do agree with Commissioner Zick on, and maybe I'm a little more sympathetic than he is to the residents who are at the Brickyard East, but I do share the concern that development is smack in the middle of an industrial area. And in legal parlance, I think we'd say you're coming to the nuisance, if in fact you think this is a nuisance activity. When the Mesa West Bluffs overlay zone was adopted, I brought it up here because I thought that there was some provision that related to this. And this is where I think we've got a little bit of tension. The overlay plan says a fundamental challenge of creating viable live-work units is ensuring that the live-work unit does not become purely residential use, lacking adequate common and open space amenities. In other words, there must be a reasonable expectation that business activities will occur with the space, and therefore the unit would not exclusively be used as a residence. And I'm afraid from the testimony that I heard tonight that most, if not all people who live here do treat it exclusively as a residence. And that's your prerogative. That's apparently there may not be a restriction in the CC&Rs. But that is not consistent, to my mind, with the expectation of what the plan intended and what we are expecting for this larger area. So I support this application. I think it's a potentially good use. I will be casting my lot with my colleagues to the right.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Anyone else wish to comment? Commissioner Colbert, yes.
One final comment, just to, in looking at the plan one more time, I know there was a comment made related to a trap door to prohibit noise. I would just recommend to the applicant to really consider that as an option. I see an opportunity to where the storage room is located, that there could be potential to put a corridor there connecting to the exterior to prevent that sound that will be coming out in that echo chamber, I think was the statement. So if the opportunity to put a corridor in as you get to the check-in area counter, going down that, I think that would be really a good opportunity to prohibit noise or to reduce it.
Okay, Commissioner Russell, any comments? Okay, I'll call for the question.
That motion carried 3-2 with Chair Jericho and Commissioner Zick voting no and Commissioner Torje absent.
Okay, and that decision becomes final unless appealed to the City Council within 7 days. Thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us on our agenda to departmental reports. Mr. Mejia, Public Services Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I have an update on some of the work that we have been doing in the engineering department. So we have been working, in addition to working on facilities like the Costa Mesa Library and the upgrades to the first floor of City Hall, we also have been doing quite a bit of street-related work. The current citywide street rehabilitation program and alley repair program for the past year is going to spend approximately, let me rephrase that, it's going to invest about $7 million in our infrastructure to maintain it in a very good condition. And the reason I say invest is because we are not waiting for the streets to fail before we repair them. We have a program where we try to catch them before that happens. And what we come up with after implementing these improvements is to maintain what is called a PCI, or pavement condition index of 85 or better, as directed by our City Council. So with these $7 million, we were able to repair a number of parkways and curbs and gutters that were damaged. We resurfaced a number of streets. We have slurry sealed another number of streets, worked on arterial streets to keep them also in safe operating condition. And just last week, we completed the repaving of MacArthur Boulevard between Harbor Boulevard and the Santa Ana River. We did that work entirely at night because it's a heavily traveled street, and the results have been excellent. I've personally driven the street, and it's very smooth as was intended. We took a number of steps for the street. As this street's age, they do not hold their original shape. The subgrade tends to move. So with the street, we made repairs to localized areas. We then leveled the street and then placed a final cap that uses hot rubber mix, that uses ground tires, and that has two benefits. One is it reduces reflective cracking from the subsurface, and the other one is a much quieter ride. So when you get a chance, take a drive. We have a lot of work ahead. Beginning in 2020, we're going to have a lot of arterial streets under construction. For example, Merrimack Way between Fairview and Harbor Boulevard is going to be under construction, as is Hamilton just west of Harbor Boulevard. Bear Street between Baker and the 405 freeway, we paved the north half about a year and a half ago. Santa Ana Avenue north of 22nd Street, and probably our biggest project next year, it'll be probably towards the middle of 2020, will be the rehabilitation of Newport Boulevard from approximately Mesa Drive south to 19th and then north to 22nd. That addresses the areas that have had more surface distress. As I remember working on that street back in 1992, 93. So we've gotten a good over 25 years of life from the street, and it's the right time to resurface it, level it, and resurface it so they can serve us again for another 10, 15 years. That is my report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mejia, for all your hard work. Ms. Lee, do we have a Development Services report?
No report this evening.
Okay, Mr. Preziosi, City Attorney report.
Thank you, Chair DeArcol. I'm pleased to announce that in the Orange County Needle Exchange Program, the city and the county's challenge to that program, the court ruled in favor of the city and the county earlier this month when it granted the city and the county's motion for judgment as a matter of law, in essence, and held that the applicant, that is the Orange County Needle Exchange Program, as approved by the state, failed to follow the state's rules under CEQA. That is, it did absolutely no CEQA analysis whatsoever prior to, the state did no CEQA analysis prior to actually approving their permit to operate the needle exchange program in the city. The state argued the somewhat disingenuous position that the Orange County Needle Exchange Program, and thus the state, was exempt from CEQA for this project, and that it wasn't a project, despite the massive evidence of how the Orange County Needle Exchange Program operated in Santa Ana and the amount of litter that was, needle litter, that was deposited in Riverbed and the surrounding neighborhood. So that was an excellent win for the city at this point. What this means practically is that the Orange County Needle Exchange Program can't operate until it complies with CEQA and goes through the CEQA process. It's not an absolute prohibition against the Needle Exchange Program operating, but it certainly requires them to go through the state CEQA process.
Thank you very much. That is indeed good news. So tonight, I want to again remark we reflect in the record that we're adjourning tonight's meeting in memory and with our best wishes to all of the students at Saugus High School who were victimized today by the horrible shooting, and acknowledging the families who lost loved ones or whose loved ones were injured, and to the students who clearly probably faced a very frightening moment. I just want to adjourn the meeting tonight, acknowledging that we're thinking of them, and we hope for their best and fastest recovery that they can have. And so we'll stand with that thought in adjournment to our regularly scheduled meeting of November 25th. Good night.